3. All right, perfect. Okay, well, everybody, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. Very happy to be rejoined by our returning champion, Cindy Sheehan. Cindy, as everyone should know, is a longtime anti-imperialist activist, social justice activist, and as well as an independent journalist in her own right, the host of Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox. She's been a frequent guest on this show, which is why I'm very happy to have her back on, especially July the 26th, which we're going to talk about. And on this specific edition, we're going to be talking about all things Cuba, because unfortunately, Cuba is the powers to be just remembered that reminded themselves that they have this ongoing grudge against Cuba. So Cuba's being targeted by the powers to be yet again, and unfortunately, there are many on what we would call the pseudo left who are jumping the shark on it. And Cindy's here to push back against much of the propaganda that's being leveled at Cuba. So first off, Cindy, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's an honor to have you back on. And the first question then, Cindy, that I'd like to ask is, as I mentioned, the U.S. and its allies have rediscovered, unfortunately, that they have a grudge against Cuba. Once more, they're trying to overthrow not just the current government in Cuba, but they basically want to overturn the entire system, the many policies of social justice, universal healthcare, and so forth. They're weaponizing the coronavirus crisis to do it, and whatever alleged human rights abuses, shortages and whatnot. But one can't describe the yearly struggles that Cuba deals with without discussing, ironically, the causes for shortages and stuff like that. So can you explain briefly, or however lengthy you'd like you'd like to describe the embargo, the sanctions of mass destruction that the U.S. has in place on Cuba, and how it's gotten progressively worse from JFK, Camelot to Trump and the current Biden administration?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to point out that this is my son's bedroom.
Wait 1 second. Wait 1 second, Cindy. I can't seem to hear you for the time being. Wait, do that again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So anyway, I was just saying the decor is my son's bedroom because he's out of town for his job, and I'm watching his little boy overnight. So this is the only quiet place in the house I have to do this interview.
No problem.
And I feel like falling asleep because I'm laying against a pillow. And
he's got a good taste in art, so no problem.
Yeah. So in 1959, the 26th of July movement that was inspired by a July 26th attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba was finally successful. The dictator Batista was kicked out of Cuba. The revolution led by people like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, Raul Castro, they were successful in overthrowing the Batista, who was the dictator of Cuba that had been supported by the U.S. and U.S. imperialism. It was like, it was anything goes there. There was casinos, so casinos, there was gambling. That means there was a lot of crime, a lot of organized crime. The people of Cuba were suffering, most of them were suffering under this U.S. imperialism. And so they through the Batista. They decided to work for a socialist communist government.
Yeah.
And so the first thing that this revolutionary government did when they came into power was start a literacy campaign. And they sent teachers, I think beginning, so this was 1959,
Yeah.
1960, they were training teachers to go all over the island um, to get to teach people how to read and how to write and basic understanding of education. And there's a wonderful documentary called Maestra, that's Spanish for teacher, specifically a female teacher. So many young women went out to the country to teach people, and I think the youngest teacher was an 8-year-old boy, as a matter of fact. And the thing about this is most of them were in Havana, and most of them were pretty well off because they had educations, right? So they wanted to help the revolution.
So sorry to interrupt, because you mentioned that one of the youngest teachers that's that the one of the youngest teachers that the socialist communist government employed was an 8-year-old boy.
That's right.
And was he and was that because he was from just a well-off family and was very advanced and was very advanced? So
well, he was literate, he was literate. So and he wanted to help the revolution. And that's the thing, is that these were children of Cubans who decided to stay and not flee the counter. They were not counter. They might not have been revolutionaries, but they weren't counter-revolutionaries. They didn't leave Cuba with billions of dollars of wealth like the Cuban-Americans now who live mostly in Florida.
Yeah.
Did. And so anyway, the U.S., especially when the U.S. started to see Cuba go towards the Soviet Union and towards communism, they decided to do whatever they can to. The U.S. decided to do whatever it could to prevent this. They tried to assassinate Castro hundreds of times, right? And so even exploding cigars, stupid things like that. They sent a woman to I forget her name, but they sent a CIA operative to woo him and get close to him and then assassinate him, but she actually fell in love with him.
Yeah.
So she didn't assassinate him. And so anyway, they started the blockade. They started the blockade and the embargo, and it's gone to be very strict. It loosened up a little under
Obama, briefly.
Obama, maybe a little bit under Carter, but Clinton was the one, and during the Clinton regime, he was the one who made it illegal not just for U.S. companies to trade with Cuba, but any global company. If any global company or country trades with Cuba, they have a year, maybe 6 months to a year, that they can't trade with the United States. And so the United States has 330 million greedy consumers with the means to purchase things. Cuba has 11 million people who don't have means. So you're going to sell a few cars to Cuba, or you're going to sell thousands of cars to the United States. So most countries and most most private companies went along with the blockade. And so it got under Obama, we were able to travel directly to Cuba for the first time.
Yeah.
And from on Southwest, from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I had gone directly from Miami to Cuba, but that was like a special
Hmm.
charter flight that they would only run. And this was when Bush was president, that they would only run um, for church. I had to pretend like I was on a church tour for that time that we went to Cuba. So anyway, we could do that,
But
and
you had
then
to wait. So you had to pretend that you were part of
yeah.
some church group to try to convert the godless people
No, I
of.
think a tour of like the cathedrals and things like that. And,
Okay, okay,
and so, maybe to do
okay.
some outreach, I don't know. But so the guy who signed my permit, he said, just go get a picture taken at the cathedral in Havana. So we could say, yeah, you were there to do this religious stuff.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
and so under Trump, of course, a lot of that stuff was overturned, and I guess Biden's administration just passed even stricter sanctions against Cuba because this Yuri, this like blows my mind because of Cuba's ongoing human rights violations, and this is from a country that is the biggest abuser and human rights violator in the entire world, right?
To quote
And
to quote Martin Luther, the late Martin Luther King Jr., the greatest purveyor of violence on earth, my own governments.
mhm.
Yeah.
And of course, sanctions are violence. Sanctions have harmed so many people around the world. I don't know if Cuba is the longest sanction regime of the US. It's been 60 years. So I don't know. I don't know. It's crazy. And I know that recently Cuba was in the news
Yeah.
because they were saying that there was this popular uprising against the government. And um, there were some protests, but it was due to lack of food and lack of supplies. And that's only because of the blockade,
Mhm.
And so but also they're trying to do this color revolution in Cuba because Obama actually started something called Cuban Twitter, where they would have trolls like go and talk about how terrible Cuba was and how awesome the United States is and stuff like that, to foment with these NGOs and USAID, these so-called popular rebellions, which actually aren't. And so the biggest protests, or not protests, demonstrations have been in support of the revolution. And that just shows you how determined and proud the people of Cuba are for what they've been able to do since they kicked out the United States and kicked out capitalism and kicked out imperialism. There's been immense gains in the civil society, in terms of education, healthcare, unfortunately, they do occasionally have shortages of food and staples because of the blockade, and you can't grow not every microclimate can grow every food, right? So, like, well, I went there one time and I didn't have any bananas, and a recent hurricane had wiped out the banana crop. So yeah, that's how precarious that Cuba has lived. That's how dire that their straits are in Cuba, and it's 100% because of the blockade.
Uh, Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And I think, that leads me to, the second question, because I mentioned, before I asked, my first question about what are the different, evolutions of, the blockade, the embargo. And I mentioned in my introduction that, the powers to be are weaponizing the Cuba's response to the coronavirus as a as a reason for overthrowing a government. And okay, like, and I don't want to get into a big conversation about the coronavirus, but I'll just say that, like, I give most of the Western world and Latin American countries like Brazil a humongous F in their response to the coronavirus. And I don't see many people, well, I mean, people in Brazil are demanding that Bolsonaro be impeached for gross criminal negligence, but you could also make that argument that, okay, if Cuba hasn't responded well to coronavirus, well, I mean, come on, shouldn't Britain, the United States, then have shouldn't we be supporting color revolutions in the U.S. and then Britain's overthrow them? So I just wanted your response on that briefly before I ask a question about Cuba's response to the coronavirus.
Well, I have been able to avail myself of Cuban healthcare. And to me, it's exemplary. And the thing is about Cuba, mostly, like, maybe not right in Havana, but when you get into the other provinces and the outskirts, it's a holistic approach to healthcare. They have a doctor, and their doctor actually makes visits to their house. Periodical visit, periodic. I'm really tired. Periodic visits to their houses, and they even look in the refrigerator to make sure they have healthy food. They they have a beer with the family, and then from that, that visit, they say, oh, well, does this family member need to be referred over here, to a specialist for something? But it's like a community. It's like a community, very holistic response to healthcare. And they don't have, like, antidepressants. Yeah, they don't, I'm not saying there's no clinical depression, but the overuse of antidepressants in the United States has dramatically increased the incidences of depression and suicide and all kinds of horrible repercussions because of this big pharma. And so if I lived in Cuba, we've talked about this before, I don't trust the US or anybody in the media or the government said about the coronavirus at all. But if I lived in Cuba, I would trust my community. I would trust my doctor. I would trust my family. I would trust my neighbors, because that's the kind of system that they've built. They've built a system of trust and a system of care and compassion in Cuba. And so I think their response was very Cuban. I know a lot about it, but I know that that's how they did it. And I'm banned from Facebook again, but I just recently read, and I would have responded, that some Cuban-Americans, who are almost all counter-revolutionaries, and they've been against Castro, they've been against Cuba this whole time, they raised enough money to send 6 million doses of COVID vaccine to Cuba. And some of the peace industrial complex people were involved in this. And I was like, you know what, Cubans aren't stupid. The United States has done everything they could to kill Cuba and kill the people of Cuba and its leadership. I wouldn't trust, like, anything that came from the United States to be, like, shot into anybody's veins, because even if it was like this pristine vaccine, you never know what the United States would do to make people sick there, right? Anyway, if I lived in Cuba, I would definitely trust their response to the COVID thing.
And that's a perfect segue into this question, because Now, I was under the impression from the indie news media I consume and others that Cuba was actually handling the coronavirus crisis pandemic very well. They even had a vaccine that they wanted to export to the world. I know that Cuba's been sending their doctors across the globe to help other countries in their response to coronavirus, especially the ones that are also sanctioned by the U.S. Now, why were they unable to export their vaccine? So why, for example, in the country I live in, Belgium, why am I not able to get Cuba's vaccine, which I would trust? Now, is it because American and Western European big pharma is that because of American and Western European big pharma monopolizing the crisis? And if there is still an ongoing pandemic in Cuba, I assume that is because of the embargo, the sanctions of mass destruction, is more the reasons why Cuba has been, why Cuba's not able to conduct its domestic socio-economic policies. Why they're not able to do more for their people, even though they're able to do the best they can, despite two hands tied behind their back, right?
Right. Well, I think yes, of course, big pharma has a monopoly. I mean, how many times have we heard that cures for cancer have been suppressed? Because that would completely destroy the cancer industrial complex, right? However, I do think that it's mostly to do with like I said before, any country that trades with Cuba cannot trade with the United States for 6 months to a year. So I think that also has a lot to do with it. And so, and we know that special interests run the United States, military industrial complex, big pharma, all these special interests. They're the ones who run the United States, not the politicians. So, I don't know. There are some countries that trade with Cuba because they're also like being sanctioned by the United States, like Venezuela, and Hugo Chavez broke down those walls for Cuba there in Latin America. So I'm almost positive that they probably exported. Cuba was able to send doses of their vaccine to Venezuela and other Latin American countries.
It's just unbelievable. It's just so unbelievable when when you hear all of this, when you hear all of this aloud. And I think that's so that being said, you already mentioned off the top of the bats about counter-revolutionary forces, the usual deep state actors, USAID, and so forth, and the expat communities that you mentioned that are mostly based in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, because we do have to push back against against propaganda, which gets more and more better at gaslighting people. Mm-hmm. So, what are, in your opinions and assessments, having been to Cuba countless times, what are some of the legitimate grievances that the U.S. and its allies are cynically exploiting to divide and conquer the Cuban people and the islands, the diaspora, and what are the half-truths, if any, that the powers to be are using in this attempt at a coup, counter-revolution, color revolution? Or is it mostly just fake news, what the global audience is receiving about the unrest in Cuba and the supposed people power protest that's happening right now?
Are you asking me if the United States has any legitimate beef with Cuba?
No, the Cuban people, the Cuban people themselves. Some of the ones that are protesting, and then if we want, we could even expand it to some of the people who have lived outside of Cuba, who have either fled Cuba, by by boat, or have or just left Cuba the moment Castro and Che got into power.
Well, the people who left Cuba when the revolution overthrew Batista were the very wealthy ones, and like I said, they fled with billions of the wealth of the people of Cuba, and their beef is that they weren't able to stay and keep exploiting the island's resources, to keep exploiting the people, right? And any any fact of them being separated from their relatives or whatever, that's the United States. That's the United States saying that, you can't bring your relatives here, or you can't go visit your relatives, which was, loosened up a lot. And I think even with Trump, people who have family there could still visit occasionally or whatever. And so they have no, like, the revolutionaries in Cuba planned acts of terror on the island that killed 1,000 Cubans, maybe even more than that. They blew up an airline. They blew up an airline that was going, I believe, to Bermuda, that had the Cuban basketball team on it. And so they've they've committed many acts of terror on Cuban soil, and Cuba hasn't killed one American. They haven't attacked the United States. They haven't killed anybody here. And so there's no legitimate beef. What's the biggest problem that the United States has with Cuba is that it's working. And the socialist experiment is working, and it would work so much better without the blockade. And so they don't, I was born in 1957, so I was born 2 years before the overthrow of Batista. I grew up my whole life believing that Cuba was this dangerous place. It was almost like the Beirut of the Caribbean or something. And so
or that the level of oppression was on the same
right,
level that
it did do human rights violations.
of Stalin or one of the
Right,
other
right.
yeah.
So that's what I was taught my whole life. And so I was taught that Castro was evil, Che was a mass murderer, blah, 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 whatever. And so even when by the time I went to Cuba in 2006 for the first time, I was far more sophisticated than I was, back in the 70s or 80s or whatever. And I was still a little hesitant.
Mm-hmm.
Go there, right? And so if you ever have the opportunity to go there, you are, for almost from the time you step off the plane, you realize that everything we've been told about Cuba is just complete and utter BS. The people of Cuba hold Che and Fidel in such reverence. It's amazing. And Fidel said, there's huge statues of Che and pictures of Che all over the place. And Fidel said, I don't want statues. I don't want, my memorial is the revolution. And so, and there's no we want to overthrow. This isn't anything that if they keep up these sanctions and they keep up the blockade, that it's going to make the people of Cuba rise up against the revolution. It's not going to happen. Hasn't happened for 60 years. And they've been in a lot more dire straits over these past 60 years than they are right now. That's when you saw the boat people, they were called coming from Cuba to Florida. They were coming because the Soviet Union collapsed. And did the United States relax the blockade? No, they tightened it. And people in Cuba were literally starving to death. my friends there say that the mothers would ground up banana peel and use it for ground beef in recipes. The average Cuban the adult lost like 25 or 30 pounds during
Wow.
that time. They were starving. That's why they were leaving, not because they didn't support the revolution, but they didn't have anything to eat. So anyway, I forget what your question was, but I'm just
So
going on
so
and on and
so
on.
so 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 if there are people in Cuba protesting against the state of affairs, it's only because it's only because of the sanctions that have been going on since the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Since the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So if there are Cubans protesting in Cuba because they're frustrated with the state of affairs,
Mhm.
it's mostly just because it's most because of the sanctions. And whenever a population is frustrated, there will always be misplaced anger. So in Britain,
So,
yeah, go.
and I'm sure that a lot of those protests, if they are against the Cuban government, have been fomented by this Cuban Twitter and
Okay, yeah.
operatives there to what are those people called that like are inserted into communities to I forget what they're called, agent provocateurs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm not saying Cuba's
Oh wait,
perfect.
uh, your speaker was having a bit of a problem again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So of course Cuba's not perfect, and of course not everybody there is happy with the state of affairs, but they recognize who the enemy is, and it's not their own government. It's the government of the United States.
Okay, interesting. And so actually, you were talking about the terrorism of the of the Cuban of the American-backed Cuban expat communities, and that's a perfect segue into this question. Now, one thing I'd like you to educate me on, is the following. I recently read a couple of weeks ago this Canadian historian, journalist, activist by the name Richard Sanders, and he did an incredibly amazing historical investigative series, very disturbing. He basically exposed how so many Ukrainian, Estonian, Latvian, and other Eastern European expat communities and these seemingly benign civil society communities and organizations that have been partly funded by Canada and the US were founded by runaway Nazi war criminals and collaborators, and they lionize Nazi war criminals and collaborators, hence their anti-Russia Putin derangement syndrome, their support for NATO expansions and endless Cold Wars and so forth. And so I basically and I'd like you to then talk to us about the about those Cuban expat communities, the ones based in Miami. Now, are most of the civil society organizations, these Cuban-American civil society organizations, were they founded by basically, Batista's, cronies? And what are some of the right-wing skeletons that's in their closets that people don't know about?
Well, I'm not super familiar with that end of it. I know that they're very vicious. I know that I have been threatened. My life has been threatened by some of these people. It's only been like postings on my blog, and I forget the name of the organization, but people told me it's a very vicious terrorist organization that claims, they claim to be that organization. They claim to know where I live. They claim to know where my children live and things like that. So, and it could just be, you never know, it's the internet. it could be the CIA agent that's assigned to babysit me or something, writing these things to me.
Yeah.
But the best illustration I have of these, and I think 1,000 is very low. I think maybe it's more like 3 or 4,000 Cubans that were killed by terrorist attacks by the Cuban-Americans. So anyway, the counter-revolutionaries.
Yeah.
And so there was for a long time, there was a movement called Free the Cuban Five. And it was 5 Cubans who came to Florida, not to spy on the United States, but to infiltrate these terrorist organizations. And so
There's a Netflix movie about it. It's a really good Netflix movie about it.
yeah, I think I haven't seen it yet, but I know all of them, now that they've all been returned to Cuba. And so and their wives and everything. But so what happened during this time period is that they found the Cuban Five, and they didn't even know each other, right? At that point, they don't like gather together and meet. They were all infiltrated in different terrorist organizations of counter-revolutionaries. And so one of them, I don't know which one, sent back information to Cuba, to Havana, that there were terrorist attacks being planned against the United States. And so Cuba, Havana, did the right thing and notified the United States about the intelligence they had found. So instead of, rounding up the counter-revolutionary terrorists, the Cuban Five were arrested. And they spent, I can't even remember the amount.
Wait. So just get a clarification. So there was going to be a terrorist attack in the U.S. by these U.S.-backed Cubans.
That's still not clear.
Okay.
Whatever their role as infiltrating these counter-revolutionary terrorist organizations, they found out some information that would have compromised the safety of the United States. So Cuba informed the United States. Now, for one thing,
okay,
if you have foreign agents, you're supposed to notify the country. Cuba didn't do that. How could they? And so the Cuban Five were arrested, and they spent many years in prison. And finally, there was an American in Cuban prison who actually was spying on Cuba, right? And so finally, there was still 4 of the Cuban Five were still in prison, and they did like a prisoner swap.
Yeah.
But the Cuban Five were even hesitant about that, because they were saying, but we're not guilty, but he was, and
because they were only in the United States, not to spy on the U.S., not to meddle in the U.S., not to do conquer and divide the U.S., but to protect their sovereignty, their national security, which was at risk because because these expat communities, these Cuban expat communities, which the United States did sanction, were committing terrorism on the island of Cuba. Right.
Yep. So they were only there to protect Cuba from further terrorist attacks. And just like how vicious they are, recently the mayor of Miami said that the United States should bomb Cuba. Now, what kind of person who's, he's not a freedom fighter. He's not like working for the betterment of the people of Cuba. He just wants the U.S. to bomb them. So, I mean, you can't trust a member of your nationality that's calling for the bombing of innocent people.
and continuing continuing on that, so is it safe to say that most of these seemingly benign Cuban-American civil society organizations, that either they were founded by Batista followers, or even if they weren't, but that in the end of the day, they all have basically very right-wing positions. So
Yeah, I
so
think
they
so.
so it's not like they
I think
want.
they're mostly Republicans for one thing,
Yeah,
and to me, even being a Democrat is right wing. So
exactly.
whatever they affiliate with politically, they're with the establishment,
And
right?
s- and so none of them have any interest in say, oh, we would like Cuba to be more of a social democratic country. We want to keep the healthcare. We want to keep the universal education, but we just want to make it a multi-party state. So there's no Cuban American opposition in Miami or elsewhere in the U.S. that advocates that. It's all mostly just, we want to overturn the revolution, and we
Right.
just want Cuba to be, I don't know, like Puerto Rico or Haiti, or I don't know, or Monaco or something.
I do know some revolutionaries who actually live in the United States and Canada. They're very few. If you find a Cuban that lives here, I would say the vast majority of the time they're counter-revolutionaries.
Okay, yeah, and is that only because the United States is very good? Well, most of the Western imperialist countries are like this. They're very good at weaponizing immigrants, and the immigrants who to assimilate ends up becoming more right wing than even the right wingers that do exist in Canada and so forth. But also, doesn't the embargo, so even if a Cuban did genuinely want to move to the United States for a better life, does the embargo get in the way of that, or what?
I think so. Yeah, I think that it does. I don't think it's an easy thing to do,
Yeah,
to move here from Cuba.
but some people claim that that Castro himself wasn't a big fan of wasn't a fan of Cubans who did want to move overseas. Isn't Castro very, or wasn't, or was Castro very strict about who can move out of Cuba to do whatever small business they were interested in doing, or what's the truth behind that?
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure about that. I know there was no choice during the they call it special period when the Soviet Union collapsed. There was just like no choice. There was no food. There was no food there. But like you said, Cuba sends doctors all over the world. They send educators all over the world. They send highly trained professionals like engineers and things like that all over the world. The one thing that they don't send, and they haven't since, um, I'm sorry, they were helping a South African country with their independence. Can't even
Yes. I think I think the country must. I'm going to take a wild guess. Namibia, I think.
No, it wasn't. I'll look it up. My brain is fried. But they don't send military. They don't send troops. That, and when they were helping this country, Jesus, with their independence and liberation, when they came back, Castro said, we're not sending Cuban troops out of the country anymore. You know, there's too many have been come back in body bags. And the Cuban 5 were actually soldiers in that war. I'm looking it up. I
Wow.
can't. I'm looking it up because I can't.
Well, that's oh, but no, but that's really fascinating because there is this image that there is this image that Cuba had this sort of uh, what was it that Stalin tried to do? Socialism in one country, or I think Mao tried to do a socialism in one country in which they had to devote everything to just the country. So not many people are allowed to travel outside the country because we have to work to rebuild the country, build a socialist utopia. But from what you're saying is that Castro did nothing of the sorts, and that Cuba has exported people who've wanted to work overseas in education, in health, in engineering, and that even contrary to because lots of people lionize Cuba's foreign policy, but that you even say that even when that Castro also like he definitely believed in solidarity for the people of South Africa, the people of the Congo, Bolivia, Chile, and so forth, but that he actually was not a fan of sending military overseas, like in Angola and so forth.
Except, was it Angola?
I think it could have been Angola. Uh-oh. Oh, wow, one sec.
Hello?
Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about
You
that.
froze up for a while.
Sorry about that. My internet got cut off. But yeah, I was saying I believe it was Angola. I think he was.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, and Nelson Mandela said that they couldn't have ended apartheid in South Africa without Cuba. He said that the United States supported the apartheid regime, and Cuba supported blockading the apartheid regime, but also helped the people of South Africa in their liberation struggle. Because I guess he had a question as how he could be friends with such a horrible dictator like Castro. And that's what he said. Well, you know, the United States supported the apartheid and Castro supported the blockade and helped us with solidarity to get through and to end apartheid.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting because actually, before I continue on then with that, before I continue on with that question about how Cuba is actually a force for good in the world. Now, some of the going back though to the counter-revolutionaries you mentioned how Cuba under Batista he basically tolerated the Sicilian, Italian, American mafia to heavily exploit the country. Now, a lot of these.
I don't think he tolerated it. I think he got really rich from it.
Batista, you mean?
Yeah, Batista got very, very wealthy from the collaboration with these people.
Yeah. So and so are a lot of the do you have any idea if a lot of these expat communities also have ties to organized crime in their efforts to overturn the revolution in Cuba?
I don't. They are organized crime. Like I told you, you know, they've threatened my life and threatened the life of my children and things like that. So they learned very well from the mobsters who went down to exploit Cuba.
Yeah, and in fact, I had Douglas Valentine on the program explain to us how the CIA and U.S. imperialism is organized crime. So
can I mention like one thing though that I just thought of? When Biden just increased the embargo, the blockade, because of the human rights violations in Cuba, they still have the United States still has a torture prison they operate in Cuba called Guantanamo. But the United States has 4% of the US world population, but 22% of prisoners. But Cuba is a human rights violator.
Yeah, and all of those celebrities and so forth who are saying, SOS Cuba, you know, I'll take them seriously. I will take them seriously, and I would be interested in having a dialogue with them if they would spend that same amount of energy saying free Julian Assange.
Well, I don't.
But even then,
I think that's apples and oranges. I think
yeah,
if they say SOS Cuba, that they're morons. And they don't deserve any kind of leeway or respect. It's just idiotic.
and explain why. Explain why.
Well, because this is what they should say. Help Cuba by ending the U.S. blockade.
Yeah.
It should the onus of this shouldn't be on Cuba. It should be on the United States.
Because because again, if there are existing problems in Cuba, if there are deficiencies,
And there's no doubt about that.
And if there are shortages of medical supplies to combat the pandemic or whatever, the root of all evil goes back to this ridiculous embargo and the fact that the US and its allies can't get over the fact that you didn't control this one island in the Latin American region.
90 miles away from the United States. So this would make them legit. If they really cared about Cuba, they would be calling for Biden to end the 60-year-long blockade, embargo of Cuba, period. That would solve Cuba's problems. 100%. That would solve Cuba's problems.
Exactly.
Even with the blockade, Cuba is so far advanced of the United States in so many things. Let me just mention a few things. Like, it has a lower has infant mortality rate. It was celebrated by the United Nations for ending childhood hunger recently. That's not a situation in the United States. The last statistic I heard, and this was before the pandemic, was 1 million children in the United States under 5 years old go to bed hungry every night. That's appalling. That's unconscionable with all the wealth and resources we have here in the United States. People are educated from preschool to university for free in Cuba. They're a very educated population. They even bring students from all over the world to get a free medical education at their medical school in Cuba. So there's just so many things that they're so far advanced with than us. I was watching a mainstream show on the Travel Channel, and I think the guy's name is Josh Gaines. And so I talked about this on Cindy Sheehan Soapbox, but
with John Bayer, right?
Yeah, he was down there looking for buried treasure. And so he made this comment and they showed people in Old Havana, like, so colorful and dancing and singing and just like being in community with each other. And he said, I thought Cuba was a horribly oppressive society, but they look really happy to me, and so they are happy, and they just like would be able to not just survive and not just like have to scrabble to exist. They would have just this wonderful existence without the Cuban blockade, and without the American blockade of Cuba. And like I think I mentioned on my show, Cubans even like refill disposable lighters. They don't throw anything away. I probably throw more things away in a week than a normal Cuban does in a whole year. And that's shame
Okay.
on me, right? But, going to Cuba and being so involved in their society has made me a better person because I'm not like that. I try to really be a responsible citizen of this planet, not because I have the thumb of the United States down on, which I do, but not, I still can consume things. I can still buy things, but not because I have to, but because the inspiration of the Cuban people to reuse like everything and repurpose everything. They have those old cars just like really held together by string and scotch tape. They do everything to keep those old cars running. And so they're an inspiration on how they've been able to adapt under so if they were really so so unhappy, why is there still 11 million of them living there? They could hop on their inner tubes and go across to Florida or whatever, but they're proud of what they've accomplished under the revolution. They went from being almost completely illiterate to being one of the top literate countries in the entire world, even more literate than the United States. They've gone from a system where, just like we have here, where everything is for profit, everything, good health care, good food, clean water is available to the 1%. And that's what they had before the revolution. Now, all these things are accessible to everybody,
Yeah.
right? And so, why would they want to go back to a situation where is such a wide disparity between the rich and the poor? They might not
Uh,
have much, but they share everything.
yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And that's wonderful. What you were, what what you were, what you were saying, Cindy. And I think if one of the last questions I want to ask you, because you're already talking about. Well, actually, let me just ask you this question again. Then, my second to last question, which is now in Cuba is there is no real opposition. Like, okay, in Cuba, is there a left wing opposition in Cuba, which would like a different approach to how the current government approaches socialism, Marxism, or is all of the opposition that does exist in Cuba really just Western backed reactionary, counter-revolutionaries?
I haven't been exposed to any of like
Oh, wait a minute. You got your speaker got cut off again.
I haven't been
Yeah.
exposed to any hostile opposition in Cuba to the government. But I think they recognize, like Hugo Chavez recognized, like Karl Marx recognized, Lenin recognized, that revolution's a process. They just didn't like kick out Batista in 1959 and stop there. It's definitely, you have to look at material conditions and things like that when you're in the middle of a revolution, and that's what they still are. They're still in the
Yeah.
middle of a revolution. So I think there's a lot of that happening, a lot of, because every time I go to Cuba, there's something, a new program. They're constantly trying to refine and improve and use what they have to their best abilities. And so I think that that's mostly what happens in Cuba, is this ongoing process of revolution and building this workers' paradise.
So the only so is it safe to say then that the only dare I say, real opposition is basically counter-revolutionary forces. These the Western the Western-backed counter-revolutionary forces who don't have a left wing, bone in their
left
body.
wing. No, there's no left wing. I think that there are legitimate concerns over shortages, but like I said, the people aren't looking at their government as the cause of that.
Okay.
Right. So, but I think that if there's any opposition, like you said, it is right wing and it is fomented by the United States and like National Institute for Democracy. Wait, the USA
National Endowment for
National
Democracy,
Endowment for
which should
Democracy.
be called the National Endowment for Plutocracy, but hey.
Right. So I do think that is, and it's not very successful. It hasn't been successful in Venezuela because the people are very proud of their accomplishments. Same thing, Chavez came in just like Castro and said, we need to educate our people so they can participate in this revolution. Education, healthcare, writing a new constitution that enshrines human rights, things like that. So, but there are forces from outside that still see the wealth of things in Venezuela, the natural resources of Cuba that can be exploited, and because they don't want to share. They're not like the people of Cuba. They don't share. They're not good sharers. They want everything, and they won't, they'll keep trying until they get everything.
Yeah, and then I'm almost done here. So you were talking about Cuba's international politics, and you already did give some examples, but can you give some more of the greatest examples of how Cuba is actually the nation which is actually a real force for good in the world, despite whatever one despite whatever criticisms people have of what the government does domestically, compared to the US, UK, and Canada's allies, who simply aren't a force for good in the world?
Well, one really good example is in 2005, during Hurricane Katrina, Cuba had like dozens of doctors on an airplane and supplies, you know, um, medical supplies, food, water, ready to fly as close as they could get to New Orleans and help the people of New Orleans. And the
Oh, wow.
US government rejected that. That's what Cuba does. See, they not only share what little they have with the people of Cuba, they share it with the whole world wherever their help is accepted.
And you mentioned that Cuba helped South Africa. Did they help South Africa just diplomatically, or
No, I
diplomatically
think
and
materially also.
yeah?
I think they helped them materially.
And didn't now my mom is from the country of Congo, so I want you to clarify some historical issues. Now, didn't when Belgium, the U.S., and the United Nations were trying to balkanize the Congo and support a breakaway region called Katanga, didn't didn't Cuba support a united Congo, and Che sent and Che went to Congo to try to keep the country united and stop Western meddling, or what's this? Or
I
what's this?
don't know. I don't know. I have not heard that story. I'd have to look that up and check it out myself.
But you did mention that Cuba was involved in the Angola Civil War on the side of the Marxist and democratic
Right.
forces, and
Yeah.
and so they militarily fought South Africa, the U.S., and even Congo under Mobutu, right?
Yeah. They sure did. But then it also took a terrible toll. And
Talk about that.
Fidel was heartbroken, by all the losses that Cuba had to suffer during that war. And this was related to me by somebody who's like not an insider in Cuba, but definitely knew Castro. And she said that he was just like devastated with all the coffins coming back. And he said, I won't ever send Cuban forces outside of Cuba again.
Oh, wow.
And I don't think they have since then.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And one of these days, I'll have to get you back on the show to talk a bit more about Cuba's yeah, Cuba's very good foreign policy. I mean, because again, whatever, even if somebody is an anti-communist left or and is not a fan of of the Cuban government, like all that aside,
Right.
and of course we've already pushed back against a lot of the propaganda on Cuba. But one thing is true: Cuba is a force for good in the world, and you cannot say that about Canada, France, Britain, Germany, and yours truly, the United States, right?
Right. Well, the United States has almost 1,000 military bases around the world. People have lost count of how many countries the United States is bombing. Sure, they're leaving Afghanistan, but they're leaving 100,000 mercenary troops there. They're reserving the right to drone bomb or bomb from jets if any, if Afghanistan gets out of hand, I guess. I don't know. And so the United States hardly ever leaves anywhere. And the Cuba is occupying Cuba. And they just, would be able to do it so much better without the devastating, brutal, immoral blockade. And I just want to mention also the United Nations votes every year that the U.S. should stop the blockade.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's only like 2 or 3 votes against it. And everybody else votes for that. And I think that's been like 20 years in a row that's been going on.
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Well, one can only hope that Cuba has dodged so many imperialist bullets, colonial bullets.
That's for sure.
So one can only hope. One can only hope that they manage to that they manage to dodge the latest bullets that's being targeted against them, and any of those Cubans in Cuba who think that it's going to be all wonderful if we overthrow the system because the United States, we want the American dream. Well, they're going to be in for a world of hurts and a world of disappointments.
Why would anybody wish that on anywhere? It's just really pathetic. Well, Youri, thank you. This is one, as you can tell, one of my favorite subjects is.
It's been an honor to have you. And actually, Cindy, if I can just trouble you with can I keep you just a little while longer? I promise not too long, but just a little while longer.
Little while.
Okay. So last year, a hero of mine in journalism and interviewing, James Lipton of Inside the Actors Studio, passed away. And in memory of him, and because I've always wanted to know, these. Well, anyways, let me get to it. So Cindy, what is your favorite words?
My favorite words?
Yeah.
How many do you want?
Just one, or even 2, even.
Well, the meaning of the words, I like the way some words sound. They're really fun. But like love and community and revolution and family and solidarity.
Okay.
Those are my favorite words.
What's your least favorite word?
Empire, imperialism, capitalism, America, United States of America. Those are some of my least favorite words. The flag.
Completely agree with you. What inspires you?
Definitely, like I talked about before, the people of Cuba and people of Venezuela, people like that who were like some of the most downtrodden human beings globally have been able to really improve their lots in life and like have confidence in their government that their government cares about them and is trying to do the best that they can with the people. The people are never
People
excluded
power.
from, yeah, they're never excluded from that. So, things like that inspire me.
What turns you off?
Ugh.
Pseudo leftists and right
Oh
wingers,
my
right?
God, liberals, Democrats, Republicans, mean
uh,
people.
what sound or noise do you love?
Sound or what noise?
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah.
No, like
What sound do you love?
I would say rain would be the top of my priority right now since we're in a drought.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Ooh, like people chewing with their mouth open.
Oh, that's a good one. What is your favorite curse words?
Can I say them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can say them. Probably motherfucker.
What profession, if you weren't doing what you do, what profession would you love to attempt?
Um, I think holistic healing.
Holistic healing.
Mhm.
What profession would you absolutely not like to do?
Um, I don't know. I think that there might be dignity in most work. Politician, I would, even though I ran for office, I never like really thought I would be a politician.
Mhm.
But yeah, probably politician. I think most other work has dignity, or it could have dignity, right?
Well, if you were elected, I know for a fact you would have been definitely a voice of reason and peace. So, and the last one before I let you get back to your grandson, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say as you arrive at the pearly gates?
Free beer.
Free beer.
That's
well,
how that's how much I take heaven seriously.
well, I imagine if God does have a wicked sense of humor, he probably would say, "Hey, Cindy, free beer over here." Well, on this edition of One Plus One, we were joined by a great spokeswoman, the great anti-imperialist, and the great truth teller and mythbuster, Cindy Sheehan. Cindy, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope to have you back on again in the future,
Of course.
and solidarity to the people of Cuba, and power to the people, death to the imperialist, colonialist, fascist pigs.
Hasta siempre, Victoria.